Good morning, students. Hope you are doing well. So, today we shall move on to another chapter in Signature's textbook. I have chosen the poem Breaking Silence from the module Speeches and Testimonies. Okay, and one more chapter we have to do in this module, that is the dictator speech, the final speech in the movie Dictator by Charlie Chaplin. That also we have to do in this module. So what do you mean by, to begin with, let me ask you, what do you know about testimony, or can you define a testimony, what a testimony is? A testimony is a formal or written, testimony is a formal written or spoken statement, especially one given in a court of law, or it is an evidence or proof of something. What happens in a court is an example for testimony. ഇപ്പോൾ സാക്ഷി വിസ്താരം നടത്തുന്നത്, സാക്ഷികൾ പറയുന്ന മൊഴികൾ, അതൊരു ടെസ്റ്റിമണിയാണ്. ഇറ്റ്സ് എൻ എവിഡൻസ് ഓർ പ്രൂഫ് ഓഫ് സംതിങ്. Breaking Silence by Janice Mirikitani is a poem written in the form of a testimony, or it's a testimony written in the form of a poem. So here is a poet, Janice Mirikitani. She is a Japanese American poet, which means that she is a citizen of America, born to parents who had migrated to the US in search of jobs and a better livelihood. She was born in 1942 in Stockton, California. She writes about the horrors of war. She advocates against institutional racism and the enslavement of women and the poor. She has written 4 collections of poetry and has edited many literary anthologies. She was appointed the Poet Laureate of the city of San Francisco. She is a prolific writer and she has edited a Japanese American anthology named Ayumi. All these details are given in your textbook. You may read it at your convenience. Her first book of prose and poetry, Awake in the River, came out in 1978. So these are the major points about Janice Mirikitani. Her parents were Japanese immigrant farmers. Okay. So before I tell you about the poem, let me tell you some things or some background with regard to the World War II, or the Second World War. World War II began in 1939 and it spanned over a period of 6 years. It began on September 1, 1939 and lasted on September 2, 1945, involving the majority of world's countries, and the majority of the countries formed 2 opposing military alliances, namely the Axis powers and the Allies. The Axis powers constituted of Japan, Germany and Italy. The major powers, the major military alliances of the Axis group were Japan, Germany and Italy, and the Allies constituted of the US, Britain, China and USSR. I mean, the major countries or the major powers in Allies were US, Britain, China and USSR, and the major powers in the Axis group were Japan, Germany and Italy. The United States was not an active participant till the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941. Have you heard of this Pearl Harbor attack? You might have heard of the name Pearl Harbor. There is a movie in this name. So Pearl Harbor is a naval base in Hawaii in the US. And the Pearl Harbor attack was a surprise military attack by the Japanese Navy Air Service at the US naval base, that is Pearl Harbor. So it was at this point that US officially entered into the World War II. Until then it was not that active. Okay. And as a way to retaliate, what the US did was they put all the Japanese Americans in concentration camps during the World War II. And the poem gives a picture of how the Japanese Americans were brutally treated. I told you this poem is a testimony. So here you can see a mother and a narrator and her mother. The mother is testifying against the war crime injustices to the Commissioner of Wartime Relocation and Internment of Japanese American in the year 1981. The World War entered in 1945, and it is after 40 long years they started to speak about the terrible situations or terrible attacks they have faced during the time of war, or whatever they faced in the concentration camps. The poem speaks of the appreciation and admiration a daughter has for her mother, and she testifies against wartime experiences. The poet shows the brutality of how the Japanese Americans were treated. The power of silence that Miri Kitani describes shows sorrow and frustration. Silence was the only way they could express their ideas and thoughts. Kirani concentrates on her mother's pain, how she grew up with pain and what it all represents. She shows a political agenda. She speaks out against the people who discriminates against colors other than white, people who show violence and also pain her mother went through. So this is the introduction part. I've given you a brief introduction of the poet as well as the poem. So just go through or just read the poem by next class. Okay, just it is almost written in a conversational tone as when I was growing up. So just read the poem. Okay, we shall explain. I shall explain the poem in the next class. Okay, thank you and have a nice day.